All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I'm going through a series of video presentations for the Rankin Technical College AWD Application and Web Development 1111.NET Framework with Web Databases class. I deviated away from our textbook, which is ASP.NET MVC with Entity Framework and CSS by Lee Naylor, to go in and start talking about another book, Professional ASP.NET MVC5 by John Galloway and others. And I'm halfway through with Chapter 1. Now, I'm not going to talk about installing MVC. We've already done that. That's not a big thing. All right. Let's get into the creating an MVC application. All right. Now, notice what it says here, this MVC Music Store. And again, not my goal here to read to you, but they are basing this on samples of this. If you go out to this site right here, it's both a terrific site and kind of a sad site. What I want to do is show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to go out to here, hit enter. This site ahead contains harmful programs. Well, then we don't want that site. But let's see. How about, can we go out to codeplex.com? Or are we going to get the same thing? No. Okay, so let's go here. We'll type in MVC Music Store. How about that? All right. In the Codeplex archive, well, it still says that there's some bad stuff in there. All right. MVC Music Store Part 1.
This morning we're going to be working on the beginning portions of the MVC Music Store assignment. In order to begin, you are going to want to download the tutorial PDF.
The bad thing about this project is it uses MVC3, which is not what we want. All right? Now, the code is out there. You can see it on GitHub. All right? And I'm looking here at this MVC Music Store documents. I did this particular project with the class last semester, or last fall of 2017 when I taught this class. All right. I may end up going through this again. I don't know. Maybe we'll do this first and jump right into the Galloway book. I don't know. Let's just see how it goes. All right. But I want to go back. And I just want to mention to you that what the author says here is that some of the examples in this book is based on this thing. John Galloway was one of the people who created this. But again, no one, as far as I can tell, really took the lead and said, hey, let's go back and let's upgrade this project that we did in MVC3 and let's upgrade it for MVC5 or MVC6. All right, let's run through these steps for creating a new MVC project. So I'm going to start up a new instance of MVC, of Visual Studio. So again, this is all stuff you've seen before. So we're going to come in here and we're going to choose File, New, Project. You've seen this before. Now, on the templates that are on the left, you should be under Visual C#, and underneath there, you should be under Web. If we were going to do the new MVC6 stuff, we choose .NET Core. We're not doing that. We're going to choose Web here. The good news, or bad news, I guess, depending on your point of view, is you don't have a lot of selections here. Again, we're not doing core stuff. So we're going to choose, I think all the time, ASP.NET Web Application.NET Framework. All right. So they ask you to do this, and let's just call this, instead of MVC Music Store as they mentioned, let's call this MVC MS for Music Store. And I'm putting it right on the desktop. Okay. Now, I'm not going to worry for right now about creating a Git repository. So I'm just going to leave that the way that it is. All right. And I'm going to click OK. Once we do this, it brings up the new ASP.NET Web Application dialog box. All right. And it tells us to do what? Select the template, add folders and core references, and add unit tests. It also talks to us about authentication and whether or not we want to use Azure. Okay, so taking it from the top, these two things work together. So notice if I come here and I click MVC, it's automatically clicked there as well. You can't have that one without that one. If I click empty, I can add any of these things that I want to add. All right. So the author says on the bottom of page 19 in this particular book, handout, whatever you want to call it, that we're working with, because you can use the add folders and core references, why do you need to start with anything more than an empty template? Well, the reason that you might want to start with something other than an empty template is when you do that, when you choose something other than the empty template, what's going to happen is some folders, etc., will be added for you. All right, so this is the explanation here on page 20, but let's look at that in comparison to this right here. All right. So if we choose just MVC, which is the one that you'll choose the most often, what's going to happen is the system is going to set up for you a series of folders. There'll be a models folder, a views folder, a controllers folder, etc. And there'll be a few other things in there also. If we choose empty, basically about all you get in here is a web.config file, which has got your system settings and configurations and a few assembly references. That's it. There's virtually no code. If you choose web forms, this is the old-fashioned way of doing things. All right? That means that basically you're creating a non-model view controller type of project. If you choose Web API, it creates an application with both MVC and Web API in it. All right, that's Chapter 11, and we're not going to cover that. If you choose single page application, it sets up for an application that's basically driven via JavaScript requests. Chapter 12 talks about that. Again, I'm not going to go over that. Okay? Now they talk about Facebook here. We don't have a Facebook. We've got an Azure API and an Azure Mobile Services. The Azure Mobile Service, as it says, for creating an ASP.NET web app backend for Azure Mobile Services. And the Azure API okay, we're not going to use either one of those. Now, the author recommends, so let's say we come in here, we choose MVC. The author recommends that you always check that box that says add unit tests. What that's going to do is it's going to add a folder for you, a unit test folder. All right, which will make it easier if you ever decide you want to go back and talk about unit tests. We will discuss unit tests towards the end of this text. All right, then we've got authentication here. And we have, if you click the button that says change authentication, you've got 4 possibilities. First thing to notice is, see how it says individual user accounts? Well, I'm going to cancel this. Okay? And I'm going to come back here and I'm going to click OK again. Notice it says right now no authentication. All right, but if I go in here and click MVC, now it's got individual user accounts, but I can change it to any of these. No authentication, the first one, all right, that would be for like a public website where anybody could use it. You did that, you could go in there anonymously, for example. Individual user accounts, that's for applications that store user profiles locally, all right, like using an SQL Server database. It includes support for a username and password, but you don't have to. Okay, the work level, formerly called organizational accounts, all right, as it says, for applications using Active Directory or Office 365. Finally, Windows authentication. That's for an intranet application. It says this book will often use the individual user accounts that are right there. In Chapter 7, we'll go into this in more depth and breadth of coverage. For now, let's leave it in individual user accounts. So we've set MVC here. We have checked our add unit tests, and we went in and set our authentication to individual user accounts. The last thing that's in there, the Microsoft Azure, allows you, if you want to, as it says, there's a host in the cloud option that can be used to configure Azure resources along with your project. For now, at least, we'll leave those off. So you can see this is basically the way that we'll set things up. All right? Once I click OK, and you've seen this thing before, but I'm going to show it to you again anyway. This is going to build a project for us, and that project is going to have a bunch of stuff in here in our Solution Explorer, which you'll see in just a minute. All right, that's kind of a dummy page that you're given, but you'll notice it builds us a model. It builds a models folder, a controllers folder, and a views folder. Notice in controllers we've got account, home, and manage. And in views we've got account, home, and manage. Every time you create a controller up here, you create a new controller in your controllers folder, you will have a views folder by the same name down here. The shared allows you to share information amongst different parts of the program. All right. So as you'd guess, and they mention this on the bottom of page 24 in the book, here's where your controllers go that will handle the URL requests. And again, the controller is the traffic cop that makes sure, because the model and the view do not communicate directly through one another, they communicate through the controller. The models is where you put your classes that represent and manipulate data and business objects or rules. Your views, which is where you put your user interface templates, used when you render output. Typically it's going to be HTML. Your scripts, which hold all your Bootstrap and JavaScript related stuff. Your fonts, which for right now just have some glyphicons basically in there. Your content, which holds both your CSS, your Bootstrap CSS, your CSS and any images that you might put in here. Your app data, which stores the files, typically database files, and your app start, which has got your different kind of configuration files. All right. Now, they do mention in the book, and again, I'm trying to go back and forth, bop back and forth, so you can see this. But when I think there's something important, I'm going to quick show it to you. ASP.NET does not require this structure. But the default structure, as it says, it does provide a default directory convention. All right. They do mention here that when you expand, and I already showed you this, the account and the home, these are controllers. In fact, you get more than that now. We go back to controllers again. You get account, home, and manage. The account and the manage, basically, those are going to be things that are going to allow you to do logging in, etc. Your views, again, that's where your HTML is going to go. I already talked about the content and the scripts. All right, since we chose unit tests, since we did choose it, thought we did at least, there's the tests folder down here. All right. All right, let's quickly finish up the rest of this chapter. There's not too much left in it. I'm on the bottom of page 27, and as the author mentions here, ASP.NET by default rely heavily on conventions. All right. And again, what they're saying by that is there is a standard way of doing things. It doesn't mean that you have to do things always that way, but when you do, it makes it easier for the system to understand what it is you're trying to do. As it says here, MVC is designed with convention over configuration. So what does that mean? Well, let's look down here. This is the bottom of page 28. The author uses this. The three core directories that personify this convention over configuration are the controllers folder, the models folder, and the views folder. As they mention on the bottom of the page here, you do not have to set these folder names in your web.config file. They are just expected to be there by convention. This saves you work for you having to do this stuff yourselves. All right, it's a convention. And as the author mentions here, then going up to the top of page 29, each controller's name should end with the word controller. I already mentioned that. There is a views directory. Underneath that views directory, there will be a subdirectory for every controller that you create. And the names will be the same, except in the controller's case, it'll have the name with controller on the end, and in the sub one, it won't have the name controller. By doing this, you make it simpler for the system to realize what it is you're trying to do. And that can be pretty doggone important. So to summarize, because this is the rest of Chapter 1 here, on the bottom of page 29 and the top of page 30, we had a quick little intro to ASP.NET MVC. We showed how the ASP.NET Web Framework and the MVC software pattern work together to provide a way of creating web apps. We very quickly, in fact, I mainly glossed over the history of the previous versions of ASP.NET MVC, except we talked some about ASP.NET MVC 4. We looked at how to create a sample application. That pretty much is it. All right. So the author says here, the first 6 chapters of this book are intended to provide a firm foundation in the fundamentals of ASP.NET MVC. That's then what we are going to do. All right. Last thing I want to mention very quickly here is we are going to go over this. I've made the decision, good, bad, indifferent, this MVC3 music store, we're going to do it. It's 7 years old, but we're going to attempt to do it in MVC5. That's what we're going to start the class with. Then we're going to jump into the Galloway book. All right? Okay, so I'll be back with the next lecture shortly.